On October 14, 2025, a wildlife monitoring trail camera in the foothills west of Sundre, Alberta, logged its 7th documented visitor in 4 years to walk directly up to the housing, stand close enough to fill most of the frame, and leave without touching the unit. The camera is one of 24 stations in a long-running survey of Alberta's feral horse population, mounted at a fixed height on a lodgepole pine, beside a well-used game and horse trail. 19 of the other 23 stations on this same grid have lost at least one camera to theft since the survey began in 2022, several of them more than once. This one has never lost a single unit. What makes this particular frame worth pulling from 4 years of routine data isn't the visitor alone. It's the pattern behind the visitor. 7 separate people on 7 separate dates, none matching in build, clothing, or gear, across 4 different seasons, each one approaching this exact camera, each one leaving it exactly where it was mounted. Picture the trail at that hour, mid-October light, going flat under a thin overcast, the pine's bark still damp from an overnight frost, the kind of quiet stretch of foothill forest where a person on foot can hear their own boots from 30 yards off. This was not a camera nobody noticed. Every one of the 7 documented visitors stopped directly in front of the housing, close enough that frame-fill measurements placed them within arm's reach of the mount. It was not a locked or reinforced unit deterring casual theft either. This station runs the same off-the-shelf housing, same cable, same lock as every other camera on the grid, several of which were stripped in under a minute, according to timestamps recovered from replacement units afterward. And it was not a low-traffic station, easy to miss. Its retrieval log shows more human foot traffic passing this exact point than all but 3 other stations on the survey. The detail nobody on the review team has been able to explain away is the visitors themselves. 7 different people, 4 years, 1 camera, and not one of them took it. Every other station gets stripped. People walk up to this one and just look. Where that camera sits matters as much as what it caught not happening. Camera trap theft is not a fringe problem in wildlife research. A 2019 peer-reviewed survey of 398 researchers using remote cameras found that 74% had personally experienced theft of their equipment, and 42% had experienced vandalism on top of it. Losses that in some reported cases ran to 30 or 50 units taken in a single incident. A separate camera trap study monitoring wildlife road crossings in Costa Rica lost 65% of its units to theft, despite metal security cases, cable locks, and posted warning signs on every mount. Researchers who work this field describe theft not as an occasional setback, but as a recurring operating cost built into every budget from the start. Alberta has its own documented version of this problem, and it isn't old. In October 2021, the Help Alberta Wildlife Society reported to the RCMP that 10 research cameras had been stolen from the Williams Creek area near Sundre, part of the same general foothill country this station sits in. The investigation that followed eventually traced more than 100 stolen research cameras to a single suspect who was arrested. That case closed. The theft pattern across this specific survey grid did not, and has continued in the years since the arrest, on stations the earlier case never directly touched. It would be easy to assume this one station simply sits somewhere harder to find, tucked off trail, low visibility, easy to walk past without noticing. That explanation survives a glance at a map. It does not survive the station's own retrieval log, which places it on one of the busiest stretches of foot and horse traffic on the entire grid, well ahead of several stations that have lost cameras multiple times in the same period. It would also be easy to assume the camera itself looks less worth stealing. Older housing, visible wear, nothing that reads as valuable at a glance to someone passing by. Equipment logs show this unit was replaced with the same current model as every other station in 2023, and photographs from that year forward show hardware indistinguishable from any other mount on the survey, down to the same visible brand markings. And it would be easy to assume 7 visits over 4 years is too small a sample to mean anything on its own. Set against a grid where losing a camera at all has been the statistical norm, 19 of 23 other stations hit at least once. A 4th consecutive year with 0 losses and 0 attempts visible on camera is the outlier that needs explaining, not the baseline that needs no comment. The survey itself covers roughly 400 square kilometers of foothill forest and provincial grazing land west of Sundra, terrain used simultaneously by researchers, hunters, hikers, ranchers, and a feral horse population that has occupied this specific range for generations. An area larger than the city of Calgary within its own municipal boundary, with a fraction of the road access and enough overlapping human traffic that a camera going unnoticed for 4 straight years was never a realistic explanation on its own. Understanding exactly who runs this survey and why a single untouched station eventually drew this level of scrutiny matters before anything else about this file makes sense. The grid is maintained by a coalition of independent researchers and a provincial wildlife advocacy group with several years of field experience documenting Alberta's feral horse herds, the same general community that worked with the RCMP on the 2021 theft investigation. None of the people running this survey came to the file looking for a mystery. A station with a perfect retention record for 4 straight years is, on paper, simply good luck, until someone finally sat down and counted how good and how unlikely that luck actually was against the rest of the grid's numbers. Most of the coalition's working hours go into horse identification and range mapping, not equipment security, which is part of why a quiet station drew so little attention for so long. Each station on the grid was provisioned identically, same mount height, same housing, same cable lock, same retrieval schedule of roughly 90 days, placed along known horse and game corridors rather than concealed off-trail, since the survey's whole purpose depends on catching horses using visible, well-worn routes rather than hiding from the animals it studies. No station, including this one, was ever deliberately hidden from casual foot traffic, and no station was ever treated as higher priority for security than any other. The first 3 years produced exactly the pattern researchers had learned to expect from other camera trap programs: a scattered but steady loss rate, cameras gone within days or weeks at several stations, replaced and remounted as part of the survey's ordinary operating cost, budgeted for in advance the way the broader research literature suggests any program this size should expect. Station 14's log, by contrast, simply kept accumulating months without incident, unremarkable in a program used to losses elsewhere, and in no particular hurry to explain why one point on the map was quiet. The pattern wasn't noticed in the field. It surfaced during an annual retention audit, when a volunteer cross-referencing theft reports against station history realized one camera had never appeared on the loss log at all, not once, across 16 full retrieval cycles spanning 4 years. What the review eventually cataloged from that station's 4-year archive amounts to its own inventory, built the way any flagged pattern on this grid gets built once someone decides to look closely. The visitor count itself: 7 individuals, all confirmed distinct by clothing, build, and gear across 4 different seasons, each one approaching within arm's reach of the mount before leaving empty-handed. The equipment log: identical hardware to every stolen station on the grid, replaced on the same 2023 rotation, no unusual security features added at any point in the station's history. The traffic log: this station ranks 4th of 24 for total human passes recorded, ahead of 12 stations that lost cameras at least once in the same period. The theft log for the rest of the grid: 19 of the remaining 23 stations hit at least once since 2022, several more than once, for a combined total of 61 cameras lost grid-wide in 4 years. The retrieval schedule itself cross-checked against every documented visitor's timestamp. No missed pickup window, no gap in coverage that could account for a theft simply never being logged in the first place. And a check of the surrounding vegetation and mount hardware at each retrieval. No scuff marks, no tool damage, no sign anyone had ever so much as tested the lock. And patterns like this one, a single station outperforming an entire grid's loss rate for reasons nobody on the review side can point to, surface out of long-running field surveys more often than most people watching this would expect. Subscribing with notifications on is the only way to know when the next one gets reviewed and released. Now, back to that pine west of Sundra. No investigation followed because nothing here had been stolen. The opposite happened 4 years running. What followed was a comparison of this station against the 2 nearest camera points on the grid, both within 3 kilometers, both hit by theft at least once in the same period. Neither of those stations shows anything resembling the pattern at Station 14. No repeated close approaches, no visitors lingering in frame, nothing recorded except the theft itself, and then a blank camera log until replacement weeks or months later. The closest thing to an official record on this pattern comes from 2 separate sources, and neither one addresses it directly. The RCMP's 2021 investigation closed with an arrest tied to the Williams Creek thefts, a resolution that accounted for a specific ring of stolen equipment operating in the same general foothill country, but said nothing about why any individual station on this particular survey might be spared, since the 2 cases were never formally connected. The Research Coalition's own internal theft log, maintained meticulously since the grid began operating, documents every loss by date, station, and estimated value. But it was built to track what's missing, not to explain an absence, and nobody designed it with a category for a station that simply never appears in it at all. That gap accounts for why this pattern has gone unaddressed publicly for 4 years. Sitting unremarked inside a spreadsheet, nobody thought to read for its blank rows instead of its filled ones. It does not account for the pattern itself. One point about this file requires complete transparency, stated exactly where it belongs, and not folded into a footnote. Some volunteers on the survey have speculated, informally, that word has simply spread locally about which cameras belong to a known research effort and which don't, a kind of unofficial local courtesy extended to a program some residents in the area recognize on site. That explanation has never been confirmed by any of the 7 documented visitors, none of whom have been identified or interviewed, and it remains entirely speculative, offered by people who work this ground rather than by anyone who was actually there when the decision got made. It deserves to be weighed exactly that way, as an unconfirmed guess, not as an established reason. Attached to almost any other research program, one lucky station wouldn't draw a second look. But this survey already carried a documented pattern into the review. In 2021, the Williams Creek thefts became a formal RCMP case that ended in an arrest, but left the broader theft problem in the region otherwise unchanged, with new losses reported from other landowners within the same year. In 2022, the first full year of this specific 24-station grid, theft losses began at a rate consistent with the broader academic literature on the problem, scattered across more than a dozen stations within months of deployment. By 2025, the cumulative total reached 61 cameras lost across 19 stations, every single one of them except Station 14, which by that point had already logged 3 of its eventual 7 documented camera-shy visitors. A program that loses equipment everywhere except one specific point on a documented 4-year rhythm stops reading as scattered bad luck distributed unevenly across a grid. It starts reading like there is something specific about that one point in the terrain, or about who passes through it, that the rest of the survey simply doesn't share, and that nobody running the grid has been able to isolate despite 4 years of otherwise thorough record-keeping. That pattern is not confined to the past 4 years. The grid remains active, the theft log is still being updated at every other station on a rolling basis, and Station 14's most recent retrieval, in October 2025, added a 7th visitor to a log that, as of this file, still has nothing else on it at all. Set against the wider academic literature on this problem, the numbers involved here are not small. A program losing 61 units across 19 stations in 4 years sits well above the loss rates reported in the 2019 Global Survey for researchers running comparably sized grids, placing this coalition's overall experience closer to the worst-case outcomes described in that data than to the median. Against that backdrop, one station with a zero-loss record isn't a minor footnote inside an otherwise ordinary program. It's an outlier inside a program that is itself already an outlier, which is part of why this file drew a second look once anyone finally ran the comparison. Camera trap programs elsewhere have documented similar pockets of unexplained immunity inside otherwise theft-prone survey grids. Researchers working wildlife crossing studies in parts of Australia have reported individual stations that went years without loss inside programs, losing equipment at rates comparable to the Costa Rica study cited earlier. A pattern attributed informally to everything from terrain to local reputation, never conclusively resolved in the published literature on either continent. The architecture is the same, a program with a documented, quantified loss rate, and one point inside it that simply doesn't follow the curve everything else on the grid follows. Nothing that follows is established as fact. It is the only account this station's 4-year visitor log and the survey's own records actually support, and no more than that. One reading of the file places it like this: 7 people, on 7 separate occasions across 4 seasons, each independently deciding against taking equipment they had every practical opportunity to take, for reasons none of them left any record of beyond the decision itself. Whether that reflects local awareness of the survey, a shared but unspoken courtesy toward a program some in the area recognize, or simple coincidence repeated 7 times running with nothing connecting one visitor to the next, the footage shows the decision being made and does not show why it was made. The physical record doesn't move once the theories are set aside. 7 distinct visitors, 4 years, 0 losses, against a grid that lost 61 cameras across 19 other stations in the same window. No security advantage on paper, no traffic disadvantage in the log. None of it has been reconciled with the loss pattern the rest of this survey has documented in exhaustive, repeated detail across every other point on the map. This channel does not claim to know why Station 14 has been spared, and it will not pretend the researchers who maintain it know either. 7 people choosing not to take a camera is not the same thing as a confirmed reason, and 4 years of silence in a theft log is not the same thing as an explanation. What the record shows is what the record shows, and where the record stops, this account stops with it. Files like this one, a documented pattern with every data point recorded except the one that explains it, surface out of long-running field surveys more often than most people expect, and most of them start exactly the way this one did, as a routine retention audit, flagged because a volunteer noticed an absence instead of skipping past it, the way most reviewers would. If you know of a case that belongs in this archive, the comments are usually where it starts. The camera is still mounted on that same pine west of Sundre, running on the same 90-day rotation it always has. 19 other stations on the grid have already been replaced at least once this year, some more than once. The frame ends. The one camera that was never taken is still watching to see who comes next.